All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of ObscuraCast. As always, I have my usual co-host, Danny O'Neill. What's going on, sir?
What's up, man? How are you?
It's another day, another dollar, dude. I know we have a really interesting topic that we want to get into tonight. It's another conspiracy society or secret society that we both sort of have a little bit of knowledge of, but we want to delve into a little bit deeper. Before we do get into that, I did want to plug our socials. So if you guys did not know, not only are we on Spotify, we're also on Apple Music, as well as we have an Instagram and Twitter or X account. It's just @ObscuraCast on both of those platforms, same name as the podcast. Like I said, we're both on Apple Music and Spotify. So we've been getting a lot of traffic also over the podcast, especially from people outside the US. So we appreciate you guys listening in. Like I said, with the holidays, we sort of got sidetracked and we weren't able to do as many episodes as we wanted to, but we're trying to get back on. It's just life happens, and we're going to get into another episode tonight on something pretty cool. So tonight we are going to talk about the Knights Templar, Dano.
Yes, we are.
Really interesting topic from a lot of point of views, just because there's some misnomers about what the Knights Templar is or was and sort of what they've turned into, because it's a society that's actually still around today to a certain degree. It's been spidered into different factions and that kind of thing, but it's still sort of existing in today's day. So first talking point I wanted to get into, just sort of set up the scene and set up the podcast. So who do you think that the Knights Templar were supposed to be? Because like I said, there's a lot of misnomers about secret society, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, all that kind of stuff. Why do you think, or what do you think they were supposed to be? Like, what was their founding principles and that kind of thing? Where do you stand on that?
Protecting Christians from vandals and from other stuff. Actually, not even just Christians, but just people from, when after the first crusade, the roads from the Holy Land to Europe and stuff like that were really barbaric. There was a lot of crime that happened, people getting robbed and killed. So they were really like almost like a for hire security service at first. So that's kind of how that started.
So
And
I
it
know,
evolved.
yeah, I was going to say, so they always do, right? Everything sort of evolves. I guess where I stand on it is that they were sort of a militant arm of the church at that time, because the church was more or less, for a lot of the world, especially that part of the world, the church was sort of the end all be all when it came to certain things as far as policing and things like that.
They definitely were for the Vatican, but that's not how they started off.
Right. No,
You know?
exactly. That's my point.
Yeah.
But as any society, anything in life, it always progresses into something, not necessarily what it was supposed to be because of outside influence, things happening that sort of twerk the jaw as far as things going a different way.
Big one was the money.
Yeah, so that we're going to get into that, and that's actually a really cool thing that they're one of the first. Like I said, we'll get into it, but I don't want to give too much away. So why do you think, so we sort of stand on the same sort of tip as far as what they were supposed to be? Why do you think they still come up in conspiracies? Why do you think they're still so relevant after, let's say, 200 years plus of being around in some form or fashion?
I think it's because you can find, like, they find Templar relics, coins and weapons and material, like, all over the world. They're kind of, like, everywhere. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched the show, Oak Island, The Curse of Oak Island.
I think I've watched it with you a couple times.
Probably dad was really infatuated with that. He read that thing when he was a kid. But they found, that's in Nova Scotia. They have found Templar items all the way there on that island. And there's supposedly a secret buried treasure. There's supposedly the Templars had a huge mass treasure. I think most of the treasure's just in the Vatican. I don't think they buried any of it, but that's whatever. There's a lot of treasure stuff. They had immense wealth. People, you had everything from kings to peasants who would donate money, property, or valuables to the Templars, which would go to the Vatican, which is why the Vatican has 75 miles worth of, storage underneath the Vatican.
You're talking about the secret archives and all that shit?
Yeah, 75 miles worth of shit. That's a lot of stuff over.
It's not just your like pen and paper. It's like, actual like folios and stuff like that from Plato and Aristotle and all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah,
the stuff that's down there we'll probably never know for sure unless you somehow get some chance or some, ability to go down there and actually look at it yourself. It's kind of like you know, if you were going to go to the FBI building and try to see like files in the FBI buildings and stuff like that. Like it's a need to,
Probably even
it's
more.
well, that's what I'm saying is it's like a need to know basis. Even then you don't really need to know, like, you know what I mean? It's very, very secretive, very close to the chest.
If I was a betting man, I would say they probably have some stuff from the Library of Alexandria down there. Like they probably have so much shit that they're never gonna release, like you said.
Do you think it would be damaging to release it? That's another sort of rabbit hole we could go down.
Some of it probably. Some of it absolutely probably because I mean, if you look at it, you know, they rewrote the New Testament what I forget when they rewrote it, but they left out like we've talked about it before. Like I think the original Bible had 80 books in it and
Well, that
I
was the
think
Council of
they left
Nicaea,
out
right? That's essentially what
yeah,
that council was about, was to pick what was going to go in and what was going to get taken out.
yeah. So, I mean, think about all the stuff and evidence that they probably have. Look at the Book of Enoch. We've
Well,
talked about that
I was
before.
actually just going to mention that. You beat me to it, though.
Yeah, like that's one example. There's
That's
several
a pretty glaring
examples.
example because essentially it's about an alien abduction, right? It's like a firsthand account
Yeah,
of alien abduction. Yeah.
yeah, yep. So, I mean, imagine the stuff that they have down there. What if there's like supposedly the Templars had an ark, you know, the Ark of the Covenant. Supposedly there's like 6 of them that, you know, were protected, and the Templars had the arks. At least like 4 of them. There's supposedly like 6 and they had 4 or something like that, but
And then
like
on top of that, you had the Holy Grail as well.
Holy Grail. Yep.
So some
Yeah.
pretty auspicious, not just Christian relics, but relics in general.
And I think that because their reign was only 200 years, it was so short, but so vast and so big and intense that, like, you had this, they started off small, grew huge, and then boom, was just disbanded because we'll talk about it later, but essentially France got into debt with them and didn't want to pay.
So while we're on the tip of sort of setting the scene, so that's sort of like the very generalized bubble view of what we're going to be talking about. We'll get into we'll get into some backstory about it too, as well as some things that you guys probably didn't know, and even stuff that we didn't know. But doing the research, it was kind of eye opening. But the two things I sort of want you guys to sort of keep in the back of your head as we're talking about stuff to sort of make your own conclusion is secret societies. Do they actually exist, or is it just powerful people protecting interests that are close to them and important to them? And also the history of something like the Templars or the Freemasons or the Illuminati or whatever. Is it mostly truth, or is it just a story that sort of came out of what actually happened? It's like the telephone game that we've talked about on different episodes, where you sort of have something happen at the beginning of the line, and then once you get down the line to the 50th person, it's changed drastically, and it's not even close to what it was supposed to originally, what you were supposed to originally be talking about or looking at. So you want to talk about a little bit of the post First Crusade chaos that sort of led up to the origin of the Templars, Danny?
Yeah, sure. 1099, the Christian forces captured Jerusalem, and that was during the First Crusade. And, it was a victory for, Christianity and Christendom. But, like I said before, the roads to the Holy Land from Europe and from, Asia and all that, it was extremely dangerous, and it was plagued by bandits and hostile forces. Pilgrims traveling from Europe were routinely robbed, slaved, and killed. So the founders, it was around 1119, and a small group of knights led by you.
I think
You want to say that?
it's a tough one. It's a French name. It's Hugh de Payens, I believe.
Yeah. What Blake said: a French nobleman vowed to protect Christian pilgrims.
So that sort of brings us into like the danger of the pilgrims and what they sort of came out of necessity. Like I said, they didn't start out this way, but essentially they were like a policing of those roads is essentially what they were responsible for.
Yep, for higher security, basically. They consisted of 9 knights. They took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and they lived a austere lifestyle similar to monks.
So they were essentially, I don't know if you know this, I mean, they essentially weren't pacifists, but they weren't looking for trouble, right? They were just trying to police the roads. So they were obviously armed, but they weren't, at the beginning of things, they weren't really trying to use it unless need be.
Yep.
It's fair.
Yep.
But I think the vows, the poverty, chastity, and obedience is interesting because if I'm not mistaken, aren't those the 3 vows or a couple of the vows you have to take when you actually become a priest or a nun?
So, yeah.
I think it's pretty close. If it's not those 3, it's definitely part of it. But like you said, 3 or 9 original knights, so very small sect of people. The crazy thing is the immediate backing by the church. And then you want to talk a little bit about the Temple Mount? Just sort of why that's important.
Yeah, so they actually given their headquarters were on the Temple Mount, believed to be the ruins of Solomon's temple, which that's how
Which
they.
I've actually been to that, by the way. It's actually pretty auspicious and cool. Remember,
Yeah.
I told you I went to Israel
Mhm.
and was like next to the
Yeah.
Wailing Wall and all that kind of stuff. Because if
Yeah.
anybody doesn't know, I think we've talked about it before. Maybe I haven't talked about it on this podcast, but I know I've mentioned it and maybe in one of the other ones that we did with a couple of buddies of ours. But essentially, the Wailing Wall is said to be, or I think it's also known as the West Wall. I think essentially what that is it's the last remaining wall of that temple. That's why it's so important. It's one of the last, if not the only wall that's still standing, like structurally sound wall of that original temple of Solomon's temple. So that's why it's so significant. Just a little context of why that matters.
Yeah, no, and that's how they pretty much came up with their name Templars because they were on Solomon's temple. So
But
that's why that
I,
is significant.
Yeah, the immediate backing by the church, just to give context on that. So, the papal support of the Vatican and the church itself, that took place in 11. The Council of Troyes formally recognized the Templars as a religious order, was strongly supported by Bernard of Clairvaux, and he wrote in a book portraying the Templars as quote unquote holy warriors. So, they immediately had backing by the church, which I think is really significant, especially back in those days. I don't know how you feel about that. That was sort of like, I mean, you're basically
Yeah.
getting the nod from God or the vessel of God to do whatever the hell you want to do.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Why do you think they got papal? Why do you think they got papal backing so fast? Why do you think they decided that these were the guys?
Because I think those three vows that they took, and they were there to protect people. They weren't there, like we said earlier, to start crap and whatnot. They were there to protect Christians from just traveling to the Holy Land. I mean, think about it. If you're, you know, Vatican, other than the Vatican, like what's a more holy place would be Jerusalem, especially
Yeah,
after the Crusade, getting all the Muslims out of there and stuff. So, you want to make sure that people are protected so they can go to the homeland, and that's what they did. And I think that because they kind of did it, hat in hand, and weren't, causing more trouble, it was literally just a protection thing. Especially back then, because you got to think about it, like how many other places in Europe and Asia and the Middle East were, Christians were being enslaved and killed, So of course you're going to get the Vatican and the Pope's support for being brave and protecting your people.
I think the craziest thing was the privileges they were granted. So we talked a little bit about them getting backing from the Vatican, but they also had some pretty crazy advantages, or I don't know what other word you want to use. They sort of had a leg up on everybody else. So they answered only to the Pope. They were exempt from local laws and taxes, and they could build churches, collect donations, and cross borders freely. So basically, like I said, they got the ability to do whatever the hell they wanted from the rip.
Yeah. Yep.
But I know as far as you said they were sort of in the same realm as monks, but they had sort of a militant style to them. Like monks are obviously like peace, love, no violence, that kind of thing. They're sort of pacifists in that degree.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting to note it's interesting. It's basically says that they became shock troops of the Crusades, which is actually pretty crazy considering the time period. They were heavily disciplined. Like I said, they were working for the church, so they sort of had to uphold that credo while still trying to be militant, which is a tough line to toe, I think. You're trying to sort of spread the message of like Christianity and that kind of stuff, but on the other hand, you have this militant force that's trying to sort of push that narrative forward. So it's like I said, it's a sort of fine line to toe. They were never known for retreating. They would only retreat if they were ordered to. So essentially, they would stand and fight until there was no more fighting to be had, which I think is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, if anybody doesn't know, the mantles that they wore, the Templars' uniform was essentially chainmail, and then over top of it, they would have like a mock or like a smock or like a tapestry with like a red cross on it. That was sort of their moniker as being part of the Templars.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you sort of feel about since they were working for the church, obviously the religion card comes into play. How do you
Mm-hmm.
feel about that being used, religious belief being used as a military weapon? What's your stance on that? Do you think it was necessary? Do you think it was an excuse? Where do you sort of sit?
I think given those times, it was necessary because it wasn't just Christianity that was doing it. It was, all the religions used religion as a all countries and kings and stuff used religion as a power hold. You gotta think too.
Well, I was going
Back
to say
then,
too,
you
I was going to
didn't.
say not even back then is you can make the argument that there's factions and groups doing that now.
100%.
It's held the test of time. It's not just something that happened. It's actually still pretty prevalent in today's day.
Yeah, yeah, and like you gotta think too. Back then, they didn't have like police and like the how we have in technology. Like nothing was scarier than burning in hell for eternity. They, made rules and laws based off religion that was like, hey, you better follow this and be a good person, or you're gonna burn in hell. So,
Yeah, there's an alternative that everybody was scared of, and that's I don't want to say they used fear as a weapon, but essentially that's what it was.
we use fear today as a weapon. That's why you don't run people over on the side of the road because you don't want to go to jail.
Right.
Like we always use fear.
There's that moral rhetoric that everybody sort of has in the back of their mind for the most part. I wouldn't say everybody,
Uh,
but vast majority.
yeah. So, and you gotta think too, like they had the first crusade, second crusade, third crusade. You gotta remember, like Chris horribly persecuted too. So they went through their whole timeline of being enslaved and being killed if you were a Christian and all that stuff. Back then it was, yeah, you had people that got sick and tired of getting enslaved and killed and all that stuff. Yeah, they fought back. Of course, the Vatican and the Pope is going to endorse them. And then you want to push, you know, the other group out. Like Napoleon has said, and we've said this several times on this podcast, the victors write the history books. So you kind of got to take everything with a grain of salt too. And you got to as much as you can, put yourself in their shoes back then in that time period. Like it's just different.
I agree with that. I think the other cool thing is since they were essentially an extension of the church while they were doing what they were doing, how do you think the psychological impact on like people that they faced was a thing? Like I have to believe that, like you said, it was the like we both sort of said at the beginning and throughout the episode so far, we were talking about the fact that if you went against the church, there were bad things coming your way.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that psychological card sort of impacted who they fought?
Well, I mean, eventually people stop fighting them because well, not fighting them, but like trying to take out the higher hierarchy guys because anyone that they were sent to, that the Templars were sent to protect or be stationed anywhere, like they tried taking Crusaders out. They killed someone, like assassinated them. Another one just filled their spot. Like they had so many guys in, and think about like what they wore. You just see like those white cloaks with the red cross, and there's, thousands of them, like, and they're elite warriors. I don't know. You got to think like that just probably does something psychologically.
Yeah, I
It's a little
mean,
intimidating, you know?
it's almost like not only is it an extension of the church, but if you're an extension of the church, you're essentially the extension of God. Like
Mm-hmm. So it's
that,
God's army coming to kill
right?
you.
Exactly. That time frame when that was such a huge thing, I could definitely see it playing a psychological card for sure. Like,
And you got to think, not only are you going to die, but they're probably going to make it not quick. You're
right?
probably going to have a slow death. And then you're going to be sent to hell.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the double whammy. Like you're getting taken
Mm-hmm.
out by essentially God's army, like you said, and then on top of that, since you went against the church, you got another one coming. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not great. So to that tip, do you think that the blind faith that they had was an advantage or a weakness when they went into war? Do you think it could have been both?
It probably could be a little bit of both, but I mean, in war, that probably helps because you're not thinking, oh, should I be doing this? It's just like, yeah, like we're doing this. Like, you gotta think like militaristically, even with our soldiers now, like you are completely stripped of who you are. They break you down and they build you up. You're like a fucking robot. Like, we didn't just establish that in the last 100 years. Like, that's been a thing for thousands of years. The Romans, that like all the great armies do it. So I think, put yourself in one of those soldiers' shoes, one of their bodies, like, you're probably going to be very confident and cocky.
You have the power of God behind you.
Exactly. Like you have the power of God behind you. He's going to bless you and your sword, and you're gonna just go in there completely confident. You're not going in there thinking that you're gonna lose,
Because
you know?
essentially, from what we've talked about, failure was not an option for them.
No, they fought to the death. Like, you weren't getting captured, you weren't whatever, you were fighting till the death.
So essentially, they were going for the martyrism type scenario.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you think it's more of an advantage than a weakness,
Yeah, I think when it comes to, like,
given what they were trying to accomplish?
I mean, yeah, but then here's the thing too. We can look at Napoleon and be like super confident,
Well, I was gonna
also
say you could look at that,
egotistical.
or even
He
something
fucking
something
had,
closer to now would be like the General Custard thing, the little bighorn. Like the overconfidence is gonna kick you in the ass sometimes.
yeah. And like what? Napoleon lost like 1 or 2 million of his soldiers because he pushed on through the winter instead of listening to his advisors and said, "We can't do this. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna kill our army," and he fucking decimated millions of his soldiers. Like, at some point you kind of got, but at the same time, here is where I think that blame and whatever, like, obviously the blame goes on Napoleon, right? If you're a soldier, you need to be able to trust your fucking leaders that they got, like, they're going to put you in a position to win.
Right.
So
Or not
you're
necessarily win, but at least be successful.
yeah, so, like, you don't wanna go in there thinking like, "Oh, are they" no, like, "Hey, the top dogs know what the fuck they're doing, that's why they have these ranks, that's why they're our leaders. We're gonna go in there and kick some fucking ass because they're gonna put us in the best position to be successful, or at least give us a chance." So I think with that thinking, it's they probably, like, having a blind eye to it is probably better than second guessing it. What do you think?
I think it could be both. I sort of stand with you on the fact that, like, I get it. You have like this whole backing of the church and God and the auspiciousness of the whole deal. Like, you were a chosen soldier, you were folded into, something that not everybody necessarily gets to do. It's sort of like a chosen soldier type deal. So I get that.
Mhm,
That definitely invokes some confidence and would definitely help you. But I think that, again, pride is foolhardy.
mhm.
I think that I genuinely believe that pride comes before the fall. I
But is it pride or is it belief? Because you gotta remember, like, especially back then, the religion was a which it still is for a lot millions of people today. Like, that is a lifestyle.
Yeah,
Like, it is a belief. I wouldn't
it's
say it's
it's
pride, it's
it's tough.
belief.
It's tough to say what I would do or how I would feel about it because I didn't grow up in the lifestyle, to your point.
Exactly, yeah.
If that's all you know, it's tough. It's tough.
Mhm,
It's kind of like people like to take it out. I mean, you talk about people that are in the Amish community, it's the same sort of thing, right? It's all they grow up knowing.
mhm,
Essentially a lifestyle. It's all they know and that kind of stuff, which they do have the opportunity. I can't remember what age it is. They do have the opportunity to leave that community. But once they do, I
mhm,
think there's like some shunning that happens or something like that, where essentially they're shut
mhm,
out of the society for the rest of their lives.
mhm,
So you have that would be sort of another extreme example, whereas like if I don't do this, and honor was a big thing back then. So like I would have to believe that being a Templar, like if you have a family, they're like that's like, one of if not the highest at that point in time places to get to as far as not just career but lifestyle and life in general. Like that's like the
well,
pinnacle of like
yeah,
military and that kind of stuff. Back
yeah,
then
well,
at
you got
least.
honor and tradition was a big thing, yeah, so
Because you were
if you
talking
try
about like the Greeks and the Romans and stuff, like they were the same sort of tip. You think of a place, you think of like an incident like Thermopylae, like it was 300 against what it was like a million or something like that. It was something to that
uh,
effect.
it was 300 to, like, I think 10 or 20,000 or something like
It
that.
was something
Well,
crazy.
it was something crazy,
It
but,
was
like,
something crazy, but
yeah,
essentially
and
it's the same idea is that when you became a part of that lifestyle, especially with Templars and like that kind of thing, or even like the Spartans, for example, like we were talking about, that was like that was the glory of going to battle, was dying on the battlefield.
mhm,
So, and to a certain degree, it's still around today, but that was like I think you're right in saying that the tradition and that kind of stuff was a lot more palpable back then than it is necessarily today. Because today, sometime, for the most part, when you were born in that lifestyle, you were going to war. At
yeah.
least now we have some sort of a choice, but that was like your lot in life was to go and die on the battlefield for your country, which we
Well, you
still
just
do
gotta
it
think
today,
there was
but We still do it
It's
today,
different.
obviously. It's still around, but at least we have a choice. What I'm getting at is essentially that was like your calling. That was what you did.
Well, you gotta remember too, like, and there's conflict all over the world right now, but back then it was hand-to-hand combat for the most part, right?
Right. Yep.
You were traveling,
You're
it
looking
took you
you
how
the guy away the guy that you're fighting is literally like 12 inches from you.
yeah, and also, like, it took how long to get to these places? Like, you
Right,
were
because
gone
you
for a
didn't have the
long
mobilization that
time.
we have in the military now and all that kind of stuff, correct? Yeah.
Right, technology, so you gotta think you're with these groups of guys,
All the fucking
and, like,
time. Not only were they fighting together, but they were living together and all that kind of stuff.
they have chastity, they took all the same vows, they're not fucking,
Right.
they're not, you know what I mean? Like,
That's
they're
all they
not.
know. They're just bred for battle.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like weaponized monks or priests, whatever you wanna say, but, I mean, it's
Would you almost call it radical? Would you bend it that far?
no, I wouldn't bend it that far because, again, times were so different back then compared to now. Like, if somebody did that shit now, it's probably radical, but, like, I don't know, maybe it is radical.
With I would say with the state, it was sort of like with the state of things back then. Like I said, you grow up in that society, you grow up in that scenario. That's all you know. It's understandable.
But and, like, look at the rest of the Middle East, though, and Europe. Like, look at the other religions, I would argue they were just as extreme.
Yeah,
You
that's
know, so
true.
I mean, everybody likes to condemn Christians and Catholics, but it's like if you look at the rest of the world at that time, it's not like they were trying to do something that nobody else was doing. They
Yeah.
just happened to do it better and it spread better because of I think also you got to remember, you had Mesopotamia and all that. Like you had Rome had fallen, like had grown and then fallen, and like there was a disposition of, like when one big empire fell, everybody was trying to like catch up and take over those little sections and
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, you
you
have something
know,
that falls like the Roman Empire that's so vast, and then you have people sort of fighting over that empire, trying to sort of gain territory and land and leverage and all that
yeah,
kind of shit.
because they grew too big. It's just like with
Right.
like, Alexander the Great. I mean, he conquered so much territory and so much land that when, him and then like when, Caesar and all that fell with the Romans, it was like they could only have so many generals and,
Can
governors
only
of those
occupy so
cities.
much land at one time. Yeah.
And then, once they find out that the big Pumbaa's gone, then guess what? Now you got too many chiefs in the fucking circle. So I think they just blew up just like those things did. The only difference was that it wasn't a country. It was a society that was essentially a military powerhouse for the Vatican. It was a religion, not a country. Does that make sense? How it's a little different, how I guess like the portrayal is because
Yeah, to
they
a
weren't
certain
fighting for they weren't fighting for a country per se. They were fighting for a religion,
right.
which is just
Well,
different.
I mean, it's like annexing, right? So, like, essentially, like, they didn't want it to go away. So, this is the only, and it was under siege, obviously, because it wouldn't have formed out of nothing.
Right.
So, they were trying to protect something. And there's a great quote that all disagreements eventually end in violence. It's just sort of a fact. Like, if you're getting to a point where you don't agree, at some point, you're going to hit a button on somebody that's going to provoke violence. It just happens to a certain degree. Like some people have the presence of mind and that kind of thing to not get there, but at some point there's going
If
to
you
be
have
an altercation
yeah.
because you're just not seeing like, and it comes with like the extremist values, right? Is that like you believe something so wholeheartedly that it's a part of your life and it's how you live your life, all that kind of stuff. It's spidered into every facet of your being as a human being because it's all you've known.
Look at today. You
Yeah.
have look here. Look at the left and the right. Like the extreme sides. I'm not talking about the majority where we're
Right.
in the
You're not
middle.
talking about like
Look at
moderates or
the
like independents or
no, no,
something
no.
like that. You're talking
I
about
mean,
the far left and the far right.
fuck,
Or
man.
we're talking about like off the spectrum, left and right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You're a fucking extremist because they're both just out of this world. It doesn't matter what anybody tells them. It doesn't matter what facts you show them. They're not changing their stance.
It's almost like a stoic mentality. Like they don't have any, this is where I sit and you can either like it or get the fuck out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no
Oh, yeah.
talking. There's no talking. Like there's no There's no ideology sharing. There's no like back and forth. There's no debate. There's no nothing. It's just, it is what it is. But I think that's an interesting point, just given the fact that we were talking about that, like, could it be an advantage or a disadvantage? So I guess you could make an argument for both. I do agree that the confidence thing is probably the most paramount thing out of the two sides, just because, like I said, at that time, with everything that was going on, religion was sort of like the cornerstone of lifestyle back then, at least for the people we're talking about. It
Mm-hmm.
was just a way of life. It's just what happened. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think another really cool thing that we were going to touch on, and we sort of touched on it in the intro, was the Templars and how they were sort of economically built up. I thought that was interesting information.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about them is they actually they constructed and maintained the first international banking system. They were responsible for that banking system. They I think I even read too that they came up with some kind of credit system for the pilgrims that were traveling.
Yeah, they issued letters of credit. So what they people were giving them all these donations, but there was no way to like keep track of it and stuff. And also countries actually, this is what gets really crazy. France is why the king wanted them killed, was they were issuing letters of credit to not just people but to countries. And eventually we'll get into that later, but yeah, I mean, they established the first banking system and credit. They needed a way to keep track of all of the internet because it wasn't just like they were getting property and
Yeah, it wasn't like you
valuables
were
in
collecting taxes
Italy.
from your next door neighbor. They were doing it
No,
like
they were
cross
getting it
borders
like
and shit. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. So they needed a way to keep track of it, and that's what they ended up doing. So
Like you
you
also
had
touched on too, the land ownership across, like we were talking about. Like this wasn't like stuff that they were, a country to the left and the country to the right. Like they were taking over some serious ground.
yeah. I mean, you had kings that were leaving the Templars land and treasures. So everything from kings all the way down to like literal peasants, leaving them like a pig. So yeah.
I wonder if there was like, how we have today with like insurance and stuff, where it was like a sliding scale. So like, say for example, you didn't have enough money to go to the doctor, they would have some kind of sliding scale to make it feasible for you would say you had private insurance, say you had just, say you're using like GoodRx for like prescriptions or something like that. I wonder if they had that. I didn't do enough research, but I wonder if that was something that they sort of came up with as well.
I mean,
Where like if you didn't have enough money to pay them, like you said, you would give them a pig or a sheep or a goat or something like that.
that's what they would do. Yeah, absolutely.
Essentially they came up with modern economics for the most part.
Yeah, they're very innovative. I mean, when you're loaning money to kings, that kind of says something.
Well, not only does it say something that you're owing them, that they're giving them money, but the fact that they can't pay it back is actually the wildest thing. Like you have an organization that's making more money than the king, or is pulling in more revenue, and you know
Than the country.
than the country itself, and the country that they're lending the money to. That's actually kind of crazy. The other
But
the
they're
other
also getting very powerful too. And when you're a king, those are kind of the two kisses of death: money and
Yeah,
power.
for sure. I thought the no taxation thing was pretty interesting too.
That's because they're part of the church.
So they weren't taxing. So they weren't asking for interest. They were just asking for what they gave you back. And that's kind of hard to fathom, that you would think with, the land for the most part that they were conquering was more or less untouchable. So you would have to think the amount of wealth that these countries or these kings had was pretty vast, like precious metals and that kind of thing, like gold and silver and that kind of stuff. It's kind of crazy that they wouldn't be able to actually throw it back at them. That's actually really weird and an interesting point. But so like modern parallels, like for example, they're one of the reason, if not one of the paramount reasons, why we have like banks and corporations and all that kind of stuff. Like you see like Ford or GM, if you're talking about automotive, or Tesla, they sort of set the standard for what was to become those companies, like how they were formed and that kind of thing. And then you also have the NGOs with the global influence too, which I thought was an interesting point as well.
Yeah. And I mean, something for our listeners to remember. I know we talked about this very early on when we talked about the Sumerians and stuff like that, but you know, 3000 to 2000 BCE, that's when they first came out with interest on credit.
It was that early? Wow.
Sumerians. It was the Sumerians and the Babylonians created interest.
Well, I know that you're pretty big. You're pretty big into Egyptology. I know the Egyptians had taxation and all that kind of stuff, so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. But I don't
How did
believe the
the
Templars.
just for context sake, how did the Egyptians handle that? You know more about that than I do.
I mean, I can look if you give me a second here.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because it's always interesting. Prosperous societies like Spartans had it, Romans had it, Greeks had it. Like, so it's been around for a hot minute. So I guess that's the biggest thing is that maybe what we're sort of getting at with them with the banking system, it was the first thing that was like documented like to a T. It sounds like.
Well, they created like deeds and like titles. You know what I
Right, that's
mean?
what I'm
Like
saying
that
is like
stuff.
they progressed it forward versus just keeping the
But it was
status
like
quo.
internationally, not just local, which I think the Sumerians and like Egyptians and all that, I think they did keep track of stuff, but I don't know if it was on like an international
So
level
it was more
because they
like a local
obviously weren't.
level between
I,
what the territory was, that kind of thing.
again, that's a guess. That's what an educational guess. Don't people don't crucify me on that. So taxation was what people owed the state. Ancient Egypt ran on a tax in kind system, not money taxes for most people. They had a grain tax, which was 10 to 20% of the harvest. In bad years, rates could be adjusted. They had a labor tax. Citizens owed weeks of labor per year, and that labor was canals, temples, and pyramids, livestock, and goods. So they had taxes on cattle, oil, beer, linen, and that stuff. Then they had a land tax based on Nile flood levels measured by nilometers. Taxes were assessed and recorded by scribes, making Egypt one of the earliest bureaucratic tax states. Interest on loans for ancient Egypt. They had a 33 and a third annual grain loan tax. So example, if you borrowed 100 sacks, you had to repay 133 sacks of grain.
That
So
makes
you were
sense.
taxed on objects, not money.
Okay.
Silver loans, usually 20% annual. Short-term emergency loans could be higher. These rates are recorded in legal documents like Middle Kingdom contracts, New Kingdom temple archives, Demotic legal papyri, which is a later period. Interest was often simple interest, not compounded, so they weren't completely screwing them over.
I think it's interesting to note too is that like with all this talk about like money and wealth and stuff, despite the vows, they became immensely wealthy. I think that's kind of an interesting contradiction.
They became wealthy because of the Vatican.
Right, but like what I'm saying is they took the three vows that we talked about, but then they ended up sort of flipping that script, which is interesting.
Well, they took the vows, okay, but you got to remember, like, think if they did get taxed, it wouldn't have been as big. They
You're talking
would
about them
those taxes.
themselves, or are you talking? Okay,
If they would have been taxed, the whole reason why they got so powerful is because there was no country could tax, nobody could tax them.
right.
You know, like think about why, like, go to downtown Cleveland. Like when Paul and I worked for that moving company, you worked for him too a little bit. Like we would go when we did the voting machine gig when we had to go, you know, our company got the job to go and deliver all the voting machines and we had to go pick them up. Do you know how many churches, small churches are in downtown Cleveland? Just downtown Cleveland.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
And like they're not in like actual churches. They're in like rundown buildings that you're like, this guy is definitely a scammer. Like, are they actually holding a service here? You know, it's like they don't get taxed. So like it's been going on for a long time. You know, could you imagine if you didn't have to pay taxes, Blake?
No, I can't.
Yeah,
It's
you'd
because,
be.
well, I mean, I can, but it's become such like a staple in just life that I think a lot of people just like. See, this is the thing is when I do my taxes, for example, I don't know how you do them. I take my sweet ass time doing my taxes
What do you mean?
because like when I do my taxes, I make sure that I have my W-2 in front of me and all that kind of stuff. Like,
I pay an accountant.
but you
They
understand what I'm
know.
saying though, right? Like I want to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to
Yeah.
be, like, because more often than not, there's a refund that comes back from your taxes. They overtax you.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why, like, you want to get an accountant because they know all the tricks and the trades. Like, you don't want to use TurboTax or any of those sites because there's been huge lawsuits because they've actually screwed people out of money. And you're better off paying an accountant because they know how to get you more money back. Because that's like fucking 70,000 pages of tax law. Yeah,
Yeah, and
I mean,
regular Joe Schmo's not going to know about all that stuff.
exactly. So, yeah, fun fact, don't use TurboTax.
So I know we talked about the Temple Mount and that kind of stuff. What do you know about like? I know we had done some research. So there was like like excavated underground. Was that necessary? Was the Temple Mount? I'm assuming. I think we talked about it or touched on it. That was essentially like their meeting place.
Mhm.
Okay,
Well,
so that's
originally,
essentially that was essentially their headquarters. I think we touched on right.
yeah, that was the headquarters.
But I know we talked about the Ark of the Covenant, ancient scrolls, which would be like auspicious information that nobody else had access to. We talked about like the pre-Christian knowledge that would like they had access to, like the stuff from the start of Christianity that nobody else knew essentially, maybe at that time. Maybe it's become a little bit more common knowledge now. And then they had like insight into lost civilizations that nobody knew about. And then they had like the sacred geometry with like I forget what they touched on, but there were a couple different instances in Christianity about sacred geometry, which I thought was interesting.
Mhm.
Why do you think the lack, like, so like the Temple Mount, that was sort of like their sacred headquarters, right? So there wasn't a lot of people, unless you were a part of the order itself, that had access to that information. Why do you think the lack of documentation on the Templars and like what they had access to? Do you think that's suspicious? Like, where do you sit on that? Do you think there was a
No,
lot
I don't.
more? Do you think there was a lot more to them than there is led to believe?
I'm sure, absolutely, but again, you're dealing with the Vatican, you're dealing with the Pope. Think about this, like, the Vatican is its own city-state.
Right, it's a sovereign state, right?
The Vatican has its own bank and its own currency. Like, it is separate from Italy.
It's not Italy. It's not Italy. It's not even Rome.
It's no, it is its own
Once you
place.
step inside that gate, everything that you had on the outside is vilified. It's not. It's for naught.
So yeah, no, there's probably a ton in the secret archives on the Templars that, think about just like the amount of books, dude. Think about the amount, like, I guarantee you okay, so if they were acting on behalf of the Pope, there's got to be records there, right?
Of what they did and orders they were
Yeah.
given and that kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure.
And meetings and stuff, like, they kept track of that shit. So,
I mean, if you're talking about starting the first banking system and how auspicious they were, and they were basically everywhere. I mean, I would think that there's a pretty good substantial corner of that archive that's probably devoted to them if they were that big and that influential.
yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So the next thing I sort of wanted to get into too was what we sort of touched on before, was one of the sacred relics. If you guys haven't heard of the Holy Grail, you've probably been living under a rock. If you haven't heard of the Ark of the Covenant, that's a pretty auspicious one too. So if anybody doesn't know the allure of the Holy Grail, essentially what the Holy Grail was is there. If you guys aren't familiar with the Last Supper, it was basically the last dinner that Christ had with his disciples before he was crucified. That's essentially the short version. And essentially, the wine glass or the chalice that Christ used to basically use as a symbol of his blood was essentially that cup and the wine that was in the cup. So that's essentially what the Holy Grail was from a very generalized perspective. There's also some alternative theories of that Grail. It was the Grail of Mary Magdalene. So essentially the idea was that the chalice, so if obviously we're on audio so people can't see my hands, but if you look at a woman's womb, essentially that was the symbol of the chalice. Essentially that's
Mhm.
what the chalice was symbolizing. There's also that it's the Grail of the bloodline of Jesus, and as well as also as well, it is known as like a knowledge base. So like if you were to drink from that cup, you would essentially have all the information that has ever been, essentially. So with those three or four, I guess, alternative theories, and the main view essentially is the cup from the Last Supper. What do you think? Which one do you think is more plausible out of those four? Where do you sort of sit with that one? Which one makes the most sense to you?
Probably the cup from the Last Supper.
Okay. Do you have a reason why? Considering that's the most traditional value, that's the
Yeah,
most like sought after one, the one that's the most like, I guess, consistent across the religion or the conspiracy theory.
I would say it's just because that's essentially, other than on the cross, that's the last place where the last thing that he touched that, they all drank out of. You would think that one of them would probably keep that.
Yeah.
They knew something was going to happen. because he said one of you is going to betray me. They
No,
knew
it was
something was going
it
to
was very
happen.
foreshadowing for sure. So they
So
essentially knew that it was an important event for sure.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, the womb one is interesting. I don't know. I'd still have to go with like actual like cup that he drank from, but that's one that like I haven't given a lot of thought on. So you kind of got my gears rolling there. Block A.
I'll sort of tell you what I think the Grail as knowledge would make sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting
The
one.
reason why I think that is because you think of like transference of energy, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, in the world of Christianity and that kind of stuff, essentially Christ is like the end all be all. He's the embodiment of God on earth, essentially. So the transference of energy from drinking from that cup, if you believe in that sort of thing, it makes it ethereal. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So
That
it
makes
it,
sense.
it all sort of like, since I'm agnostic, essentially, the reason why I say it's a transference of energy, because it's essentially the same thing. He was using the cup and the bread essentially as his body and blood, and essentially if you took that, like, you get what I'm saying, like it wasn't only
Oh
symbolic, but
yeah,
essentially from
yeah.
from
No,
that
I get
point of
it.
view, you were
It's an
essentially
energy
absorbing his
transfer.
power. So that's where the transference of energy thing sort of comes in.
Okay. No, yeah, that's a perfectly good
It's
explanation.
a sort of a reach. It's sort of an extension of that. But if you think about it more logically than from a a religious point of view, it sort of makes sense. So you could
Yeah.
take that from the religious point of view, and then you could use that as like a more logical, I guess, scientific point of view. They sort of say the same thing, but from two different conversations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I think the Templars mattered with that stuff is essentially the Holy Grail, to be specific, is because they were protecting lineage of Christ. So, like, you have, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen it. Have you seen the Da Vinci Code?
Yep.
Wild take on this whole
Wow.
scenario, right? A lot of misinformation and that kind of thing. But essentially, it says the same thing, is that you're talking about, like, if Christ was indeed human on earth, he would have had to have had some form of lineage.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily
But
what
that's
it
the
is
scientific
there.
aspect. I'm not saying
Well,
that's
but
correct.
no. But what I'm saying is it's not necessarily what it is that, and Dad actually agreed with this. If you read, we got to do an episode on the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you study the Dead Sea Scrolls and you study the ancient texts and stuff like that, are you familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I
I
know
can't
you've
remember.
touched on it before. We haven't talked about it in a long
So,
time, though.
like, it is a first person
But
view
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
of,
yeah, yeah. I remember now.
okay.
I remember now.
So it is a first person view of
First
the
person
accounts of
view on
Jesus.
on Jesus Christ. Yes.
Yes. So there's a lot of proof and evidence that Jesus had a lover and it was Mary Magdalene. And there's some pretty significant evidence that they had a child. So that is, the Da Vinci Code
I was gonna say, if
of
if you've never
finding
seen the movie, Tom Hanks at one of his best. I love those movies. That and Angels and Demons. It gets some bad rap, but they're good for like a
entertainment. Just shut your brain off and just watch it.
exactly, have some like misinformation and a little bit of a history lesson, but don't take it for
Yeah.
just take it for what it is. Good movies. Good movies.
Yeah. But there's a lot of we're never gonna know until we're gone, and if there is life after death, then you'll know. If there's not, then you're just gone. I don't know.
We all have to take the ride. Doesn't
I
matter.
th- I think it's the other thing too is you talked about the Ark of the Covenant. We've talked about the Pyramid of Giza before. Okay. Do you remember when we were talking about the Pyramid of Giza when you go into the king's chamber, okay, and you got the empty sarcophagus there, the big granite sarcophagus? Do you know what's very interesting about the pyramids in general, and then also that sarcophagus? I can't remember if we talked about this, but
I think we might
because
have
my
done it. I think we might have done it in the one of the we've done it in one of the episodes.
yeah,
We
no,
definitely touched on it for sure.
we definitely did. So, but this ties into the Ark of the Covenant. True or false? There was a king found in the king's chamber.
Well, you told me that it was false.
Yeah. Not only that,
Because
there
you
are
said,
no
I
high.
think you actually touched on, to make your point even more. They weren't like, didn't you tell me or something like that, or touched on the fact that they've never found a body within one of the pyramids?
Correct. And not only that, like there's no hieroglyphics anywhere in the pyramids. If you go to any of the temples, any of the, in ancient Egypt, they decorated everything in hieroglyphics. The fucking pillars, the walls, the ceiling, some of the floors, okay? The steps leading down to it, I'm going to look it up while I'm talking here, and I'll share the screen so you can see it.
Well, didn't you
The
say
steps,
I think you
they're like
touched on,
melted.
I think it maybe was King Tut, that like maybe it was another one. I can't remember which one you touched on specifically, but that one rings true, at least a little bit.
The curse that the people died.
It was either that one or you told me somebody like an excavator or like an archaeologist had like a week left and then like just like randomly found something or something like that. Didn't you say something about that?
That was King Tut. He had a week left of his expedition. He was coming down to the nitty gritty of it, and literally they found it. And what's really interesting is the main 3 or 4 people that were there when they opened the door, the tomb. They all died within like a year. And what's really fucking crazy is that each person died in very mysterious ways
Like
that
unexplainable type shit.
replicated how Tut died, they
Right.
believe.
Yeah.
Like
I remember you saying something about that.
the one dude died from a mosquito bite on his cheek, which is they said was like the same fucking thing that happened to him, and like all sorts of crazy shit. Anyway, get back to the pyramid. If you look at that sarcophagus, there's no hieroglyphics on it. There's no hieroglyphics in the pyramid. A lot of your, not mainstream archaeologists, they think that the pyramids were a powerhouse, a factory type thing for power, for energy. And they think that quote unquote sarcophagus actually held one of the original arcs.
Interesting.
What are your thoughts about that? Because I'm going to pull up pictures of this so you can take a look at it real quick, but go ahead. What do you think?
Like I said, or like you said earlier, history is written by the victors, so there's no way for us to truly know. I don't think there's too much lost history and stuff that's been doctored and that kind of thing, but it would make, I mean, if you take it all the way back to like what we were talking about in a couple episodes as far as like ethereal belief and that kind of stuff, I think it comes down to that, because something that powerful, somebody's going to want to shut it off, shut it down, keep it secret. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
look, no hieroglyphs,
right?
And then look at that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's like broken off.
And the shafts in there, like if you look at this, and recently they found, stuff under the pyramids, which the Egyptian government's saying isn't true, but they've used LiDAR and ground penetrating radar, and there's the labyrinth of Egypt is definitely down there. So they're hiding stuff. So that's pretty. But look at this, like look, no hieroglyphs, Blake. Look how big and massive that chamber. What are you building that for?
Yeah, it's definitely a question mark, that's for sure.
So they had what's called mana, and it's a chemical compound that they believe that the mana was actually a power source that they put in the covenant, in the ark.
Yeah, mana's like, if you're going to get nerdy, it's sort of like a mystical power.
Well, they actually created a substance. There's a substance called mana. You can create it now. It's an ancient substance that you can that they've created, and it's believe it's a conductor.
That makes sense.
But anyway,
it gives off energy. That makes a lot of sense.
Extreme energy, yes, because it's said that anyone that got close to the ark, they got severe burns and almost like their hair started falling off, almost like it was like a nuclear reactor.
Right. That's interesting. That's an interesting tip too. That would be an interesting rabbit hole to go down as well.
Yeah, like we could do an episode on the Ark of the Covenant itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could probably do the general episodes we've done. We could take little snippets and do episodes on each one. On like, we did one on Blackbeard. We did one on, we could do one on all 5 of those people we did in the pirate episode last episode. But getting back on track. So we sort of set the scene as far as what they were about, sort of like their rise to power, banking system. We talked about like them creating the first banking system and all that kind of stuff. I think the more interesting thing than their rise was their downfall. I think that's an interesting point to touch on, and it's important because of how it happened and sort of the parameters of how it happened. So I wanted to sort of get into like the accusations and stuff that they weren't really doing the Lord's work. They were doing the opposite, which I think is an interesting tip, because there were accusations towards the end of them being a thing, or the the charter of what they were supposed to be. With like the devil worship, I know that we had talked about off air the Baphomet stuff as far as like what that was. I think that's an interesting notion.
Mm-hmm.
But just to give context, so the devil worship stuff, so just for context of what Baphomet was, I just want to give a little context of what that is so we talk about it in case anybody's not familiar. It's a symbolic, often goat-headed figure associated with occultism, representing the union of opposites, balance, and enlightenment. So though historically it's linked to accusations against the Templars specifically, and it was later adopted or adapted as a symbol of Satanism, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going the other way since we talked about extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And while it's sometimes confused with Satan, the iconic image popularized by Eliphas Levi and by his complex esoteric concepts like male-female, spirit matter, and the alchemical solvate coagula, serving as a mirror for spiritual understanding. So that's a quick and dirty way of like what we're talking about. So with the accusations, Dan,
Mm-hmm.
do you think like there was like a spitting on the cross accusation, obscene rituals, like they were doing like, you know, sexual rituals and sacrifices and all that kind of stuff? So do you think that where do you sort of stand on the accusations? Do you think they're true, and why? And do you think they're false?
I think they're false because King Philip wasn't, look at the history books, he was a royal piece of shit. He owed them too much money. The only way he's going to get the backing of the people of France is to charge the Templars for everything that you're not allowed to do according to the religion. It was a coup. Like, they tortured them and then got some of them to admit while they're being tortured to some of this shit. And then when they were up there getting executed, they took back their confession. Like, you mean to tell me that you owe that much debt and then they just so happen to be doing all this stuff and they take these oaths and they're not doing like, you know what I mean? Like,
that's completely taken the other way. It's like creating a rumor for rumor's sake to stir shit up.
Yeah, he just wanted to get the people's backing. Like, you know, just like it would be just like what the media does today and what our government does today with people that they want to silence and get rid of. What do? They turn the narrative. They make them out to be the bad person. Like, the playbook that is used today has been used for thousands of years. Technology's changed, but the playbook is the same.
Yeah, it hasn't changed much, that's for sure. It's basically bearing down and taking away somebody's entire livelihood or their way of life.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the majority
because you make waves.
And the majority of people in this world are uneducated and don't critically think and think for themselves. They just think how they're taught how to think. And especially back then, you really weren't allowed to have your own opinion back then. So whatever the king said was kind of like law. And like, don't forget, like, again, back then, like, kings were appointed by the bloodline. They were, you know, godly appointed through their bloodline. So whatever, you know, the king said was essentially what God said. So, yeah. Sorry, that was my rant. How do you feel? How do you feel?
Well, I could definitely see the scapegoat aspect that you're talking about. So I sort of side with that, is that when people are backed up into a corner, we've all been there. They come up with wild accusations and like anything to sort of protect themselves from what they're doing wrong. So I definitely side with you on that. It's the excuse so they don't have to pay back or make reparations for everything that has happened. It's a way to get ahead, I guess, is my point. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it anything. It's when people are backed up into a corner, you start to get desperate.
Yeah. And it says here, reading about King Philip IV, he had a vendetta against the church because of taxes. They're non-taxes. So
there was essentially tinder to the flame, not just got it. That makes a lot of sense. But I think the other interesting thing about the date of when all of this happened, when they were accused of all this stuff and sort of started hunting them down, was Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
A lot of people attribute Friday the 13th as bad luck. This is actually where it stemmed from, in case anybody was curious.
Yeah, not the Halloween movies.
Yeah, but like you said, there were a lot of contributing factors to why this happened. The King Philip IV, deeply in debt, he coordinated arrests and basically hunted them down in simultaneous fashion. to get all of the Templars that were essentially in France. And then I don't know, I'm assuming it sort of spidered after, like, it sort of became a whirlwind and a tumbleweed at that
Mhm.
point. So everybody
Yeah.
was sort of on board.
Well, what happened
Slowly but surely, it just started happening.
so he got Pope Clementine the Fifth elected, okay? He, like, helped get him elected from everything I read, and he put immense pressure on the Pope to renounce them,
Yeah,
and the Pope caved. So once the Pope said, yeah, like, they're, no longer a part of the Vatican and they're all bad and blah, 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 that's when it really, really, really started to dismantle.
Yeah, but as far as the accusations, because I think this is interesting and it's also really important. So the main like four things from the research that they did that they were charged with or they were accused of and then eventually charged with was the heresy aspect, essentially going against the church. Idol worship, which we talked about and touched on, was the Baphomet, the mysterious idol, their icon that they now is associated with Satanism and all that kind of stuff that they were sort of idolizing. Like I said, spitting on the cross, and as well as secret initiation rites that were not a part of the original doctrine that they were given by the church. So essentially, all four point to essentially like using their power. This was all accusation, like I said, pulling away from what they were originally founded and supposed to do. They essentially went the complete opposite, according to King Philip IV and obviously many other people, to basically wipe them out. But like you said, also a lot of confessions that they got from the people that were in the Knights Templar, they were done under torture. They were done under really like heinous conditions. And essentially the oaths that they took and the vows that they took were basically renounced so that they wouldn't die, and they ended up dying anyways. So
Mhm.
pretty heinous point in time, especially for basically wiping out an entire order of people. Because, like I said, they were no small faction. They were backed, like we said over the episode, they were backed by the church. They started original 9 members, and then through that, I can only imagine how many people were filtered in and brought into the fold after that once it became what it was. But another really symbolic figure in this whole, I guess, play in front of us was the Jacques de Molay individual. So Jacques de Molay essentially was, I believe he was one of the original 9, I believe. Let me look here. Let me just find
No, he
out.
can't be because it was
He
around
was
for 200
he was the
years.
Grandmaster,
He was the
Goalless
Grandmaster.
Grandmaster, yeah. So he was a pretty symbolic figure within there. His final execution and the alleged curse that came after that. I kind of want to look that up because I don't want to butcher it. But I believe what happened is he put like a curse on a certain number of individuals, and within a year, like you said, I think they all like dropped dead. I think that's what happened, but let me just fact
They
check that
did.
real quick.
He cursed the Pope and the King, and both died within a year.
Yeah. So
Yep.
yeah, exactly. Yep. So that's interesting because if you're talking about like the power of God backing you, essentially they were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, and maybe that was like the penance for the church for basically thumbing the nose at them. Because like you said, it sounded like they're not necessarily. I mean, you can call it what it is. I guess it's a little bit of political corruption going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, they put somebody in power, and maybe that snowballed, and you know what I mean? Like they just eventually started taking them out and excommunicating them and all that kind of stuff because of the corruption. I have to believe that was in some form or fashion a objective of what was going on with that whole ordeal.
Yeah.
Well, just to discuss this a little bit further, do you think this was somebody seeing a group of people or a faction getting too powerful? Do you think it was justice, or do you think it was more of a reset?
No, they got way too powerful. Way too powerful. He owed them too much money. They had power. Think about it, they had land, money, and an army, because essentially, like, you got to think, like, if he owed him too much money, okay, like, what's next? Do they dethrone him?
Yeah, if you're talking about snowballs, they were already in a bad way, so this was sort of like their last resort, it sounds like, from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think there was fear of like overthrownment?
Probably.
Like they got to the
Especially some,
point where they saw like an existential or like external group of people getting more powerful than even the state was?
maybe.
Because you have to believe that not only did they have like the whole aura of being religious fighters, but they also probably had a lot of the backing of the people that were around them. And if you have the voice of the people, that can be a really, really dangerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's kind of a recipe for disaster with them.
So like you talk about like the political influence and just having the sway of like I said, people around them, all that kind of stuff. It was kind of all going in their favor. Do you think it was sort of like a corner type scenario where they were like, "Oh fuck, if we don't put a lid on this shit now, it's gonna be bad. Like it's gonna be even worse than it is right now."
Well, he already had a thing for the church and the taxation, so he owes them a bunch of money. He sees them making a bunch of money, not getting taxed, yet, his people get taxed. I'm sure he's paying taxes. So, he already had a thing really against the church already, and they were the church's military. How do you, defeat that? You get rid of them.
Dismantle it.
Yeah. Yep. Blow it up from the inside. So,
So yeah, I like I said earlier too, I think another really cool thing about the Templars is that they went away, right? To a certain degree, they were sort of silenced, if you want to use that word. I don't think they ever really went away. There's been numerous theories and like factual information that they sort of folded into the Freemasons and other sects of like secret societies and things like that.
yeah, there was a lot of ships that actually left there between the years that they think that a bunch of them got out. Actually, I think they came to the New World
Okay.
before Columbus. So,
Okay. Well, you were talking about the ships disappearing from France and that kind of thing. Do you know anything about, or maybe you can look it up because I'm not familiar with this, the Scotland and the Bannockburn scenario? Do you know anything about that?
no,
I know that
no,
the Swiss banking origins thing that we looked up, I thought was pretty cool as well. I thought that was pretty dope because you're talking about a first financial system, and I would have to believe, I think the Swedes, I think they have one of the best banking systems in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Is that not correct?
so yeah.
But the Portugal Order of Christ, I want to look that up too because that was something that we sort of wanted to touch on too.
Yeah, so Scotland and Bannockburn was fought June 23rd, 24th, 1314 between the army of Robert the Bruce, King of Scots, and the army of King Edward II of England. So,
Interesting.
yeah,
There was
it looks
also
like.
Go ahead.
Go
Go ahead and
ahead.
keep
No,
looking.
go.
I'm gonna touch on so I just looked up the Portugal Order of Christ. I thought this was interesting. So the Portuguese Order of Christ, or Ordem de Cristo, is a historic military order successor to the Knights Templar, founded in Portugal in 1318. It played a key role in the Age of Discovery, becoming a national symbol and evolving into a prestigious honor awarded by the President of Portugal for exceptional service to the country, featuring the iconic Red Cross of Christ and its insignia and Portuguese flags. So essentially, you're talking about a relic from the Templar that still essentially holds their symbol.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's interesting just for the sheer fact that it could be like a lost piece of like symbolism, so they're still around
Mm-hmm.
in some form or
Could be.
fashion.
Yeah. Yeah, they also possibly ran to Scotland, by the way.
Interesting.
Why the Templars would flee to Scotland. Templars arrested in 1307, Battle of Bannockburn. Was 1314. Scotland desperately needed trained cavalry, disciplined, and experienced commanders. Red flag coincidences. Knights disappear from France. Appearance of heavily armored, disciplined cavalry. Shortly after in Scotland, Robert the Bruce suddenly wins against overwhelming odds against England.
Interesting. That's pretty crazy.
So,
But I think
I
that
mean,
I think the key.
some of them got away.
You think they got away?
I think some of them did, yeah. Some of them did.
It would make sense because one of the key ideas I think that sort of encompasses the episode is that like, we talked about the transference of energy, and like energy doesn't go away; it just transfers from one party to the other. That power doesn't vanish; it just relocates. It sort of finds its own new place to be. Do you think that's a true fact? How do you feel about that? Do you think there are certain instances of stuff that gets that big that never truly go away? It sort of changes and sort of adapts, but it never really vanishes. That's sort of how I feel about it. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they probably evolved into the Freemasons and some of the other secret organizations and stuff. I think, dude, you got to think like some of those guys probably just vanished and took their wealth with them and went somewhere else and started a whole new life. They didn't have Face ID back then.
Right.
Like, you know how easy it probably was if you had some type of wealth to just go create a new you? Like, I guarantee you that's what happened. Guarantee it.
It was like the medieval version of the of the witness protection program. It's
Yeah.
it's a crazy
Yeah.
stretch.
I mean, yeah.
But
Yeah.
essentially, you would think that like they would have to. I mean, the other really interesting thing is where would they go? Like you would have to believe that there would be so much secrecy if you were a part of something like that you wouldn't be able to trust anybody if you were trying to like excommunicate or go into exile or something like that.
That's why they probably went to, I would say, think about this, okay? Scotland to like Iceland over Greenland to the US or Canada. You know, just New World, maybe even down south to South America.
Yeah. I mean, it would just be interesting to like if we could probably we might be able to find some information on this. There might be somebody that might be I doubt that there's information on it that's concrete. It's probably just a theory or
So,
like that kind of stuff. So the interesting thing would be like if they ever touched on somebody that was able to like resurface. You know what I
so
mean?
you ready for this one?
Yeah.
So here's the smoking gun, Roslyn Chapel. Why Roslyn is important. It was built decades after Bannockburn, filled with Templar imagery, non-Christian symbolism, pre-Columbian plant carvings, corn, and aloe. So corn, if you remember, was South America, right? That's where it originated. Linked to the Sinclair family. Templar link. Sinclair is connected to Scottish nobility, long-standing Templar sympathizers, alleged guardians of Templar knowledge. So here's the question I have for you. How does a chapel built before Columbus show New World plants?
That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's where is it located?
That's in Scotland.
What's in Scotland? Okay. Yeah, I mean, they were essentially I wouldn't say they were sort of their general like place of operation was essentially what we were talking about before. So if they wouldn't have excommunicated or made it there, how would it have gotten there? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think, like, dude, they're so good at symbolism. They were so good at, conquering all these different, like, countries and all that stuff. You got to think they probably had a pretty decent navy. I mean, they had fucking armies, for Christ's sake. They had to have had a navy to travel
Yeah.
from, you know
Well,
what I
we
mean?
talked about
So,
before that they had like I don't know if I touched on it, they had like fleets of ships and stuff like that as
yeah.
well. So it wasn't
So,
just them like they weren't land bearing, they were seafaring as well.
yeah, so you got to think, like, if shit's going down, like, hey, we're just gonna go this way.
We're just gonna hop on the boat and
And if we fall off the face of the earth, if it's flat, then we fall off the face of the earth. But we're going to go until we at least get to the other side of Asia. Because you got to think, they probably thought, like Columbus, okay, we're going to get to Asia, but we're going to go on the other side, the long way.
right.
Because let's be honest, traveling the seas back then in what they had, it took a lot of luck.
Yeah, it wasn't ideal.
You had to have a lot of luck, and don't forget, they had God on their side. They had that belief. So it
Yeah.
was like, hey, we're going to be protected. We're just going to go this way.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And if you think about it too, if you take off from France, they already had their origins in Africa, right? Essentially with Israel, with the Holy Land. So if they just follow the shoreline of Africa and then go off like the southern, or not southern, but like that west end coastline, and then just go from west coast of Africa, they're gonna hit an eastern shoreline of South America.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, like you said, how would the symbolism end up on the other? Yeah, that doesn't make sense unless
So they had to go back and forth.
right. Yeah.
Or like, they probably ran into Vikings and shit too.
Well, yeah, going through the Nordic countries, I'm sure they came across multiple
Yeah,
instances of that.
they had to have gone different routes too. There couldn't have just been like one fucking group, because how the hell do you have ancient Templar relics showing up in Nova Scotia and then also having them in fucking South America?
Yeah. So they were sort of all over the place. Like I said, yeah, they're sort of
Yeah.
all over the place.
There's also supposedly they found stuff in the Grand Canyon, but the Smithsonian confiscated it, and now like that part of the Grand Canyon is government owned and you can't fucking go there at all. There's like supposedly caves where they found ancient Egyptian carvings and like Templar relics and all sorts of shit.
Yeah. Well, getting into like I know we had talked about the Freemasons and stuff like that too, and secret societies. So like we talked about the Portugal Order of Christ, and then you touched on what was the other one we touched on that you looked up?
Scotland.
The Scotland Bannockburn. Yeah, that's right. Correct. Yeah. So you have like the symbology that's similar, the temple imagery that you sort of touched on with the Rosalind Chapel in Scotland. Initiation rituals for Freemasons are not carbon copy, but they're similar from the research that we did. And you also have like the degrees of knowledge of like the Freemasons have insight into a lot of things that aren't public knowledge when it comes to that kind of stuff. Do you think now, as opposed to then or vice versa, do you think it was more of an influence type of scenario or more of a control scenario? Where do you stand on that one? Like, do you think one is more now versus then? So like, would you frame it as like now is more of an influence type situation with what they are now versus control, or vice versa? How would you sort of frame it present and past with those two?
Control probably back then, and then like influence now, I guess.
I would sort of sit with the same sort of idea.
You know, because I mean, like, what they're technically disbanded now,
Right.
so they don't technically have a control, which I think they created the Freemasons and some of the other ones. I think what happened, Blake, was you had this, they were all one,
Yeah, it's splintered.
and then shit happened and it splintered, and they
Yeah.
went off into their own sects. Like,
Yeah.
I think the Knights of Columbus, I think the Freemasons, you know what I mean? Like, I think
it's all sort of
I think
part
it
of the
just
same
splintered.
idea. It's just different sects of the same thing.
Yeah, because if you read up and do some studying on like Knights of Columbus and Freemasons and like all the other secret organizations out there, secret societies, like huge in what? Symbolism, right? Not necessarily religion, but like God kind of, right?
The idea, yeah, I would agree with that.
Ritualistic as fuck, all of them. So I think their core, like they all have the same base core value, and then that kind of grew and went splintered with their own sects and stuff.
So essentially, they
So
have the same founding charter idea, but it's a little bit different depending on which one you talk to. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
yeah, it's almost like, you know, there's different sects of Christianity. There's
Right,
different sects of Judaism. I think it's the same thing.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. I would sort of
What do you
agree.
think?
I would sort of agree. I think that right now there's probably some form of control, but I think it's more of an influence now. It's not as like in your like, for example, everybody knew who the Knights Templar were. Like when you saw a Knights Templar individual coming at you, you knew what was going on, right? Now they've not necessarily gone underground with like Freemasonry, but like they're a lot less auspicious about it, I guess is my point.
They're not flashy.
Right, like
Why?
they're not promoting it. It's just sort of something that they do and it's a part of society, and if you're a part of it, you have the inside scoop, but if you don't, it's not readily available.
They're behind the scenes. You know, I don't know. It's like they were very in your face before, and then they kind of learned their lesson that it was like, hey, we can't be that loud
You can't
and
be
that
nonchalant about it. You
known.
have to be like, it has to be
We gotta,
regimented, I guess is the right way to put it. So that sort of begs the question that like not like the knowledge is passed down, but it's not about dominating at that point. It's about the knowledge more so than the control. So that's sort of where you sit with the influence more than the control nowadays versus control being back then. That's fair.
but I mean, okay. Do they have control though over politicians and world leaders now?
Right. But we saw, like, we also touched on it as like we've all heard the saying that history repeats itself if you don't change anything, right?
Mhm.
So like for example, there was political corruption. We saw it with the King Philip the Fourth.
Right.
Like it's sort of
And the
in their
Vatican with the Pope.
DNA. At
Mhm.
least that's what they were accused of.
Right.
So do you like is it more do you think they took the easy way out and just sort of adopted the moniker?
No, I think they actually got probably some ancient teachings that were passed down. You got to think okay, they didn't have kids, right? Allegedly. Because
Allegedly.
I heard rumors that like they castrated themselves. That supposedly is not true. They did not castrate themselves. There might have been like certain like later on maybe they did, or certain little groups that did, but they did not supposedly castrate themselves. They just took an oath to, you know, celibacy and all that. Well, there's nuns and priests that take those same oaths.
Right. I completely agree.
And so I would guess that between them probably having some type of offspring, a few of them, and then also probably had nephews and cousins and family members still that they probably passed some knowledge down, not to all of them, but a select few, and then, you know, it
Sort of spidered out
spreads.
of that, so it sort of became the telephone where like we were talking about before, it started as one thing and it's sort of a reflection of that, but it's not holistic.
Yeah, and, like, think about it too, like, these guys are really smart, right?
Right.
Like, really smart.
Well,
So you gotta
they
think if
conquered and did a lot of shit, so I would have to believe they have some
right.
sort of a brain.
So you gotta think, those guys that did get away, the few that got away, that went to North America, South America, probably, maybe South Africa, Asia, they probably started their own little groups and then passed that knowledge down before they died.
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. To wrap up, what do you think about, like, do you think the purging of the Templars sort of sparked what's happening with the different sects and stuff now? Like, do you think it was a direct correlation between what they did and they sort of went into hiding because it was necessity at that point?
Like, do I think they had to go into hiding?
Yeah, do you think that it was the only alternative?
Yeah, back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, because they were fucking condemned by, at first, the, Philip IV, but then they were condemned by the fucking Pope, essentially God's fucking human.
Yeah,
So,
see, like
yeah.
the entire establishment that put him in place in the first place torn down.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about going from the inside out. What more inside do you need than
Yeah, so I mean,
that's your
you're
whole
probably
doctrine,
gonna,
that's your whole credo coming from that, and then essentially flipping the script and getting rid of you is pretty crazy because they were
yeah.
getting too powerful. I think
Mm-hmm.
there were definite inclinations that they were going to overthrow the church and the Vatican and the Pope. I think that was a big, big, big piece.
Definitely could have. Yeah.
But yeah, I like I said, it's all speculation until you're actually folded into that fold. I still think they're around in some form or fashion. I would have to believe that something that big, that influential, didn't just go away. There's no way they got everybody. There's no fucking shot. Like I'd have to believe that even if it was one person, somebody got away because, like you said, there's stuff turning up in places they had no business being at the time.
Yeah, like, how do you explain, like, Templar currency and, like, some of the rings and, like, some of the stuff they found on that island, Nova Scotia?
Yeah,
And then also down in South America, where technically it wasn't even discovered until fucking a couple hundred years later or whatever.
yeah, because like you said, I mean, they were a pretty big brush fire for about 200 years, and then apparently, according to powers that be, just wiped off the face of the earth. There's no way that they got everybody. I refuse to believe that. It wouldn't make sense with how, like I said, without how influential they were and how big they were, and the allure of the whole idea of being a Templar. It wouldn't make sense that they would just go fade into obscurity. That wouldn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like I said, I think they're still around, but like you said, I think they're sort of splintered. It's more of a faction now than a holistic group of people. Like they probably have, like I said, they probably have the same, at least somewhat of the same core tenets, but they've also probably had to evolutionize with the way things are now.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the whole social media aspect, and then you talk about computers and technology and all that stuff. I'd have to believe that they've spidered into that realm as well. There's no way they haven't to be able to exist, at least in this time period.
Yeah, I mean,
Because we're talking
maybe
about
they're not.
influence. I mean, what's more influential than getting online? You know what I mean? Like,
Maybe they're behind Anonymous.
could be. That's actually a wild take. But I told you with the anonymous thing is that he, like I said, he's very like gray hat. Like there's a black hat and a white hat. You know, obviously white hat would be like your people that are trying to stop stuff from happening. And then you have your black hats that are just trying to stir shit up and get shit crazy. And then he's sort of in the middle, just feeding you information. It's an interesting take. If anybody's never watched anything from Anonymous, check it out for what it is. Don't necessarily take it at face value. Don't read too much into it unless you want to, but some pretty interesting shit that he comes up with and
like,
let you know about.
what if he was part of like one of these secret societies, got super deep into it and was like, fuck, I gotta let everybody.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that you have like whistleblowers, right? He's essentially a whistleblower.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't read too much on, because this is the other thing, is that people don't know if he's female, male, binary, whatever. They don't know. There's no definitive information of like even his gender or his sex or anything like that. He's just a figure. He's a symbol. And I use he. But you think about that, you think of, we've touched on Edward Snowden a couple times. Like he had to take exile. I believe we found out, I think we looked it up, and he's in Russia now. He's in exile in Russia. But you have all these people that their lives are literally destroyed for literally telling the quote unquote truth. Whether you believe it's the truth or not doesn't matter. It's stuff that stirs shit up. And maybe that's what the whole idea of the factions and the splinters of the original Templars is that they're just trying to keep the flame alive. It's not necessarily for any financial gain or any gain whatsoever necessarily. I don't know. I'm speculating, of course, but they're out for something, whether it's influence or anything else. I think you'd have to be dumbfounded to find out that they're not around anymore in any form or fashion. I think that would just be ludicrous.
I agree. They
survived. Let's put it that way.
Somehow, yeah.
They survived.
Yeah, they survived.
Not necessarily thriving to whatever metric you want to put that to, but they're definitely still around. I full-heartedly believe that. But as we close up, do you have any sort of final thoughts about Templars? Like, did you anything that you thought was interesting or sort of caught your eye while we were looking up information?
Honestly, I thought it was just like interesting how they started and what they evolved into. So what's really interesting is just how, yeah, think like they're only around for 200 years. It's like this country's only been around for what? This is gonna be 250.
Yeah, something like that.
Like in the grand scheme of things, like they were a short,
very, very, very small blurb. Yeah,
grew an immense amount of wealth and power,
and it wasn't just that they grew; it was exponential growth. Like it wasn't just sort of like a steady stream. Like you said, they went from 0 to 100 real quick. But as far as the episode is concerned, I think the coolest thing that I found out was just the scale of how they were brought up as a force and that kind of thing, to how much they were torn down and what they were torn down by, which is essentially the very thing that put them in motion in the first place. I thought that was interesting.
Here's an interesting fact. At their peak, on the late 1200s, they had between 15,000 to 20,000 members of Templars.
I'd wonder where the hierarchy would have been. I wonder between, like, if there were different, like, I guess ranks you could put it.
So only 10% of that were full armored sword carrying knights. So that's roughly 1,500 to 2,000 true knights. These were noble born, heavily armored cavalry, highly trained, extremely expensive to equip. The rest of the order, which was the real power, the remaining 80 to 90%, were essential support roles. So sergeants, which was the majority, professional soldiers, infantry and light cavalry, guards, trainers, enforcers, could fight but not knighted. And then brothers and specialists, so builders, engineers, accountants, ship crews, administrators, farmers, blacksmiths. Then you had chaplains. Priests within the order answered only to the Templars, not local bishops. Their geographic spread at their height was France was their largest base, then England, Scotland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Holy Land, and Cyprus.
They were essentially a network. They were everywhere.
Everywhere, man.
Oh, it's crazy.
Everywhere.
But yeah, I'd like to like I said, I don't think it's gone. I think it's just sort of been altered. That's sort of where I sit with it.
Yeah, because you got to think, like, they had fucking farmers and blacksmiths.
Well, you're spider webbing every piece of society essentially.
Yeah,
like so they had a sentinel in basically every form of life and lifestyle that you could possibly imagine at that time.
So people definitely got away, dude.
Yeah, 100%. Or like you said, they passed down the knowledge. One of the two.
Mm-hmm.
It was in their will or whatever. Yeah. So, but another good episode, dude. I enjoyed this one. This was sort of a rabbit hole one too.
Yeah, it was cool.
But
it was cool.
I know that we're going to talk about some other ones. We might sort of go on. We've done a lot of conspiracy theories for you guys, or not necessarily conspiracy theories, but this essentially is one, but secret societies and stuff like that. We'll try to sort of next episode think of something a little bit more out of the box, because we've done a bunch of them. We've done one on just secret societies. We've done one on the Templars, obviously, and I think we've done a couple other ones. But we'll sort of try to take another turn. We'll think of something a little bit more out of pocket for you guys as far as the format's concerned, because we don't want to sort of do the same episodes over and over, even if they're different secret societies or conspiracy theories. So we'll try to think of something a little bit more off the beaten path, so to speak. But as I said at the beginning of the episode, make sure you guys follow us on all the socials. Like I said, we have an X account as well as an Instagram account. It's just @ObscuraCast. That's the handle for both of those. And you got any closing thoughts?
This was fun. Like and share. If any of you have something on your mind that you think we should do an episode on, throw it in the comments and we'll check it out.
Yeah, and also, like I said, we're on Spotify as well as Apple Music, so you can listen to either one there. They'll be uploaded as soon as I can get it on the platform, so you guys will have it probably by we're doing this on the 15th. We'll probably have it in the morning of the 16th, if not earlier. But I appreciate all you guys. Like I said, you guys are killing it with listens and stuff. We've literally done zero marketing except for those socials, and we've been sort of backtracking those socials. Like I told Dan before we got onto the podcast that we were going to get back on that for you guys. I know with the holidays and all that stuff, I know it's an excuse, but at the same time, we also have lives too, so we have to sort of keep that in check too. But appreciate all you guys. Make sure to follow on the socials for X and Instagram, and make sure you listen to us on Spotify as well as Apple Music. Make sure to like and share. And it was a pleasure, dude.
Yep, you too.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.